Good morning, everyone. Welcome. If you are hoping to see captions, make sure that you hit your captions button, which is by your share screen. You also could look at the transcript via Otter AI. You'll find that at the top of your screen. And then we will probably not have questions during today's summit. We have some really great conversations, and I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So you can see that we have somewhat the agenda for today. We're going to be hearing some opening remarks by patients, a wonderful conversation about building an ecosystem for Black homeownership. We'll hear a conversation between Representative Chop and Representative Taylor around the Covenant Homeownership Act, and then a really interesting conversation around comprehensive plans and community voice between Gregory, Inye, Sean, and that will be moderated by Anna. If there's time, we'll have closing remarks. If not, then it will be a thank you and a goodbye. I will be going ahead and recording this. I will send out the link later. But without further ado, to make sure we can get everybody in, I'm going to go ahead and open us up with a land acknowledgement. So we would like to open this convening by recognizing that we are on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We cannot work to fulfill our mission and our vision of an anti-racist present if we don't first acknowledge and recognize the true history and the cost of colonization. However, acknowledgement is only a first step. We urge you to engage in accountable relationships and informed actions. This morning, we're going to have opening remarks by Patience Malaba of Housing Development Consortium. As Executive Director, Patience leads the association in a shared effort to increase access to affordable housing. She is recognized for her leadership in addressing the intersecting crises of affordable housing, racial equity, and climate change. She is the 2020 Bullitt Foundation Environmental Fellowship awardee. A commitment to environmental and economic justice and her passion for an equitable society led her directly to the affordable housing sector, and it was a natural fit for Patience and HDC to lead the BHI policy work to create that policy enabling environment needed to support our BHI shared priority. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Patience.
Bambi, thank you for that opening. And thank you all for joining the BHI Policy Summit this morning. It's always wonderful to look at the Hollywood Square
And just so you all know, Patience is offsite. She is actually about to go to a bill signing. And so they have her kind of in a room to the side there, making sure that she can call in. So we'll hope that she'll be able to reconnect here in just a moment and give her a few minutes. And I'll just do a little bit more of a welcome while we wait for her. It has been so amazing to have you all here in this space. It's been almost 6 months that we had been working together as a policy group to be able to build our homeownership policy framework for 2024. That framework is going to be a lot more extensive than our first one, which was last year, which is kind of hard to imagine. We are only in our second year in this effort. And so this is only our second summit, but we have done so much work and have made so much progress. So when I release that homeownership policy framework to you, which will be coming your way next week, you will see that there are many of the items we heard from the policy champions this year, and there are also items that will be coming to us that were on the 2023. Most of those items will be where we are going to keep vigilant, making sure that implementation is happening the way it needs to happen. We all know that Policy is one thing in conception. It's one thing when we are writing it up and when we are garnering support and we get it passed, it feels like we have met the milestone and we're ready to go. But implementation is everything. And patience, I hope you have some audio now. How do you feel?
Thank you. I think it's better now. And
Right.
speaking of the intersection work, I am offsite today at the Westlake Tower, getting ready to speak at the Building Emissions Performance Standards Policy press conference with the mayor. So I apologize for the technical huddle. But just with the start off of welcoming all of you and thanking you for joining the BHI Policy Summit. And before going any further, I just want to take a moment to thank the dedicated individuals who are the wind behind the Black Home Initiative policy efforts, particularly our hardworking staff in Bambi, who has seamlessly pulled the summit together just to reground us in the why we're doing this work. Because it is important that we continue to center the people and the reason why we're collectively coming together here. And thank you, Bambi, for your tireless efforts in keeping us all focused on the shared priority. I also want to do a special shout out to Anna Boone, who is our bridge and connector and partner with the core team, who's just done a stellar job of promoting this event, coordinating and being a partner. So Anna, we see you and we thank you for that partnership. Just 2 years ago, when we worked on crafting the Black Homeownership 7-point plan, the homeownership rates had plummeted to the lowest levels. They'd plummeted to as low as they were in 1968. And we know that we've seen some numbers nationally that there's been an increase in homeownership. We haven't gotten to a sense of what the meaningful increase is for Black households. But we know right here in our own backyard in Washington State, 42% of Black households have zero net worth. And let that sink in and let's break it down. It means on a regular basis, 1 in 4 Black folks that you work with, you interact with, you partner with, have zero net worth. And we know that the gateway to building wealth is homeownership, and it remains elusive for far too many people. But despite these numbers, despite the formidable challenges and barriers, we, the collective we here, have come together because we believe we can make a difference on those numbers. We have a shared conviction that we can. Through the implementation of the 7-point plan, we have kept our line of sight on our shared priority of increasing up to 1,500 low-income and moderate-income Black homeowners over the next 5 years, and doubling that number in 10 years. So with each action, we're effecting change. And we're doing that on the policy front, we're doing that on the programs front, we're changing systems. And this year, we dreamt big. We dreamt big this time last year, and we brought about bold changes. We delivered on our dreams and ensured that we passed the Covenant Homeownership Account bill, which in many ways is groundbreaking legislation that's enabling us to undo the wrongs and do things right. Legislation that is a national model. It's the first in the nation special purpose credit program. And I can't tell you, when I go to national conferences right now, it's the question that you get asked. How did we get it done? But our vision is simple here. It is that everyone can have a place that they can call home. That place is safe and it is a place that they can pass on to the next generation. But in order for us to achieve that vision, we know we need a clear plan. And we've taken the 7-point plan, focus area 6, and developed it into the home ownership policy framework that is in front of all of you. And why policy? Because we know policies got us here. And policies will have to get us out of here. They are part of the solution. They are a key part of the solution to get us out of the hole that we are in. And as Dr. King said, we are faced with the fierce urgency of now. And we must all respond with positive and vigorous action. And thank you for responding. Thank you for being a part of this network. Thank you for being a part of this movement. Thank you for inspiring change and delivering on it. We're truly the ones we've been waiting for. And let's keep getting things done. And with that, and no further ado, Bambi, I'll hand back over to you. And I know the conversations here will be delightful, inspiring, and grounding. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Patience. All right. Well, I feel ready. I feel ready to hear some conversations now. So as always, inspiring, little bit of goosebumps on my skin here. Let's go for it. So our next conversation section, this is called Building an Ecosystem for Black Home Ownership. We all know that there are many people doing many different things to be able to ensure that our shared priority is moving forward. Today, we're going to hear from Darryl Smith of Homesite, Donald King of Nehemiah Initiative, and Nicole Bascomb-Green of Umpqua Bank. So Darryl has been the executive director of Homesite since 2020, but he's been an active resident participant in Southeast Seattle for over 25 years. Homesite works to preserve and promote economically and culturally diverse communities as a home developer, a lender, and a counselor. Darryl has a long history of experience in real estate brokerage, neighborhood revitalization, municipal government, workforce development, and place-based community development. And he is a member of our BHI core team. Donald King is the founding member of the Nehemiah Initiative Seattle, a faith-based community development initiative concentrating on affordable housing and business space opportunities on property owned by Black churches. Donald is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and an affiliate professor at the University of Washington with over 50 years of professional experience in the planning and design of community projects and affordable housing. He is a member of the BHI full team. Nicole is the head of community lending at Umpqua Bank and has worked in the banking real estate industry for over 28 years. She is the owner and designated broker for Bascomb Real Estate Group and the president of Western Washington Realtist, the local NAREB board. Nicole also serves as chair of the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, and she is a member of the BHI core team. So I will stop sharing and hand it over to Nicole as moderator, and we're in for a treat.
Thank you, Bambi. Good morning, BHI. I'm so happy to be here and excited to have this conversation with two gentlemen who are phenomenal in this city, phenomenal in this work. And I have the pleasure of partnering with them and sharing this opportunity to talk with you about our policy work and discussing some of the work they're doing in the organization. So Darryl and Donald, good morning. I have a few questions for you, but first I want to set some context for the audience. We have a 7-point plan as a roadmap to build an ecosystem for Black homeownership, and policy is an important component of that ecosystem. There is a supply side and demand side to our efforts, as well as a policy enabling environment. So we do know that we're trying to do a systems change here. And that is something that is very much tied to the work and the conversation that we're going to have. So first I want to start with you, Darryl. A question for you. There are some projects coming out of BHI that will move our shared priority forward. Can you tell us about the Field Order 15 Fund and the Legacy Fund, which are part of the supply side of the equation?
Absolutely. And thank you so much again, Bambi, for the invitation. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. I get the pleasure to work with Mr. King, as I call him, and Ms. Bascomb-Green pretty much on a weekly basis through our work at BHI. And it's truly it's a joy. It really is, because there's so much out here that would make you feel, a little down about the state of which we find ourselves in the housing ecosystem, particularly when it comes to communities of color, particularly for African-American families. There's a lot to be depressed about, but we are really turning that around. And I think the efforts of this network to really truly move the needle on what's been a very difficult problem for our families nationally, and certainly here in the region, could give you, lose some sleep big time, right? But we're making a real difference. And I feel like this effort is different. It feels very different to me, getting the opportunity to work with Mr. King and many of you on this call to actually see real change happening to change the ecosystem. So your questions are apropos, because we are seeing things happen in the ecosystem that are different, that are moving the needle and beginning to show real promise. So I'll talk about a couple of those for your questions, Nicole. The first is Field Order 15 Fund, which we're very excited to get launched here in early January. In fact, coming up here on January 16th is the 159th anniversary of the issuance of Special Order 15 that was issued by General Sherman after the Civil War, that would have given 400,000 acres of land from Charleston, South Carolina, all the way to the St. John River in Florida, from the Atlantic Ocean inward, 400,000+ acres to the refugees, or what we all think of as the newly freed slaves. Well, after Lincoln's assassination, that guy we don't like, President Johnson, rescinded the order. And as a result, we never got our 40 acres and a mule. So we've named the fund in honor of that effort, because this fund is set up to support Black developers through a checklist system that would allow them to receive an up to $50,000 grant toward feasibility, which for Black developers is often the hardest money you can get. That's the money you got to max out credit cards, borrow from family and friends to figure out what to do with that piece of property, how to build the units, how to create supply. After that feasibility period with the grant support, then you get your pre-development loan at under market interest. We have a really strong underwriting committee supporting the Field Order 15 Fund, and it's our hope that the fund will help Black developers contribute to the widely shared priority of creating the units that would be available for sale to meet that goal of 1,500 new Black homeowners in the next 3 to 5 years, from South Seattle through Northern Pierce County all the way to Tacoma. So Field Order Fund and its program is something different. We've not seen an A to Z program, if you will, that supports Black developers through some of the most difficult portions of the development phase, which is pre-development, getting the money together to figure out feasibility, and bringing that all the way through to where you have an application that's ready to be reviewed and funded by construction financing. So that's one effort that's come out of our collective work at BHI that is trying to really make a difference in how the ecosystem operates to produce units. So we're really proud to be working on it and behind this effort. We're talking to Black developers right now, both in Tacoma and here locally in the Seattle area, where I happen to be sitting, to really make a difference and start showing those units to come out that we need. We have a housing shortage anyway, and we know that for Black families, the numbers that patients talked about in the opener are staggeringly bad. So we have to create both the demand side, supporting purchasers through the process, through that journey, if you will, but the supply side is also very, very important. And I'll say the second part of your question, Nicole, about the Legacy Fund, that is really, really important as well. We know that there are many amazing organizations throughout the Puget Sound region that have been working in and around these issues. The Legacy Fund is something that we're really proud about as well. It's low barrier funding to help those organizations build capacity Our organizations also have lagged behind in terms of their musculature to make a difference for communities. So the Legacy Fund is specifically set up. We're trying to obviously recognize those organizations in Pierce County in particular. We want to make sure that people understand that BHI's effort is not a Seattle thing. It's a regional thing, right? So the Legacy Fund specifically says, hey, if you're an organization that's building capacity to help toward that widely shared priority, then we want to support you. We want to make sure that you have some dollars that are low barrier. We're not going to make you fill out 25 pages of applications to be awarded. And this is an opportunity for those organizations to really work toward helping just things be different, right? They have direct connections to buyers. They have direct connections to community where folks are. We have to get the word out. So whether it's on outreach or the enabling environment, the Legacy Fund can help those organizations build the capacity they need to help us get to the goals.
Thank you, Darryl. And to your point, these are things that we've never seen before. That's what got me excited to be a part of this work. That is what keeps me going, because this is new and this is something that we've never seen before. So we talked about really the supply side from the BHI perspective, but let's share a little bit about the demand side. Tell us about the debt remediation program.
Really exciting piece of work. This could be potentially a game changer. So Homesite, we happen to be a community development financial institution. We're a lender for low and moderate income families across the state of Washington with a particular interest and mission drive to serve communities of color. And so many of the folks that come to us experience some of the same challenges. They come up, they meet our guidelines, they meet our credit scoring. The problem is down payment, right? They're not dragging a satchel full of money with them because maybe their parents or their grandparents or great-grandparents didn't have home ownership, so they're not bringing with them that generational wealth to help close the gap in the housing market. So we have a variety of down payment assistance that we provide with a lot of our mortgages. Almost all of them have 2 and 3 layers of down payment assistance. And sometimes the gap between what the house is priced at and what our buyers can afford, there's still that gap there. So how do we continue to close the gap? One way we can do this, and this is a new effort, is with a debt remediation fund. So say that you're working with a housing counselor, you've met your housing counselor through another great partner, Washington State Housing Resources Center, right? Hopefully somebody from here is on the call representing that great organization. So you met a counselor, right? And they say, hey, you can do this. Let's build a plan together to get you through the pipeline and learn about all of the ins and outs about your mortgage. You get home buyer education classes. Maybe Homesites provides them. Maybe somebody else does. Doesn't matter. What the counselor will help that buyer figure out in that journey and that plan is, hey, there's some debts here that if we could reduce or get rid of those debts, that would help you qualify for more mortgage. So for the first time, this debt remediation plan would follow the buyer so that if the buyer gets to the point where they're in escrow, maybe they work with a realtor, hopefully so, and they found that house they can afford, we get them that first mortgage. We have the ability now with the debt remediation fund to wipe those debts away up to a certain amount of money so that they can better qualify. The idea is, how do we close the gap for the buyer? So the debt remediation fund is one tool that we've not had before to get rid of those debts. Oftentimes what happens when you're determining, this gets a little technical, the buyer's sort of, debt to income ratio, the debts still sit there and it reduces their buying. So what we want to be able to do is to take that out of the factor, take that off the table for those buyers. So on the demand side, they can further qualify. So we can take the first mortgage and the down payment assistance minus the debts to help close the gap.
Thank you, Darryl. These are exciting times, and these are things that are going to be real game changers in the market with our buyers, with our builders. And to that, I wanted to talk with you, Donald. We are hearing from Darryl about different supply and demand projects, but all the Nehemiah Initiative Seattle, you address everything, both aspects of this journey. Can you tell us about the initiative and the role of the Black church in the BHI effort?
Sure, and thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Darryl. Thank you, BHI partners, for this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our involvement with BHI from the beginning, and a partner in the organization and a member of the full team. primarily because so much of what BHI does and the coalition of its partners are also contributing to the success of the Nehemiah Initiative and what we're doing. And we would hope that the Nehemiah Initiative is also contributing to the success of BHI and its goal, and its particularly its goal of producing 1,500 home ownership opportunities in the next 5 years. At Nehemiah, we like to say we have a goal of providing 500 of those homes in the next 5 years. And we can do that through our ability to have two sides of the supply and demand equation. And with that, I mean that the churches themselves have land. They have underutilized land that we are assisting them in joining with partners like Habitat and Homesite and Homestead to help them develop their land for affordable homes. Our first 4 sites that we have for church sites, each of those churches, their leadership and their congregation have decided that they would like to have their homes as ownership opportunities. So that embeds us in the goal and the objectives of the BHI, and we can work hand in hand with that coalition of partners to be able to be on the production side of housing. And the Black churches also have, of course, an assembly of its congregants, of its members, of its community that can be on that demand side, that outreach to potential home buyers, to work with home buyers to prepare them for the opportunities that may be there for them in home ownership. We feel that the churches can play a great role in this as being conveners of community actions, as the Black church has always been. And having that body of people in the pews to be able to talk to about not only their ability in churches that haven't joined in Nehemiah to produce housing, but to also be in that position, whether or not they're producing housing, to be involved in the outreach to home buyers. So this is something that we've been talking about for some time, working with you, Nicole, and the faith development side of BHI. We feel that with that help, with that collaboration, that we can certainly be successful. And I would say, again, looking at 500 home opportunities in the next 5 years, there is no reason that we cannot be able to do that. We have the supply side with the land, with churches that would like to coordinate and work with us on that development of their property. And as I said, to get them interested in the demand side as well. I think each support the other. They are mutually beneficial to our churches and their congregations and their communities' understanding of the development process, and also their understanding and their trust in the process that it will lead to the benefits of home ownership.
And it's so true, Donald. And we know from slavery time to today that faith and the church have been instrumental in moving the community forward. And having the faith community as a part of the BHI network is just, another thing that just takes us to the next level, where I know that we're going to be successful. And I agree with you. We can get there and opportunity real. I'm really excited about, particularly in the faith piece. So you're an architect and an educator. Can you tell us about the University of Washington Nehemiah Studio role they have played at Nehemiah Initiative Seattle?
Yeah, I've been teaching community-based practice design studio at the University of Washington since 2017. And as we launched the Nehemiah Initiative, I became very impatient with the idea that we did not have the funding to do pre-development services, to even assess the number of churches that we are already engaged with that were interested in seeing their property developed for affordable homes. And with that frustration, I said, well, let's maybe take this into the University of Washington College of Built Environments, where we have 5 departments in the built environments education. and use graduate students to do the studies and the assessments of these church properties. So in 2019, we launched what we call the Nehemiah Studio, and it's an interdisciplinary course that involves the departments of architecture, landscape architecture, urban design and planning, and real estate, 4 of the 5 departments that we have in the college. We have not yet engaged the construction management department, but we plan to do that in the future as well. We've just completed our 4th quarter, our 4th year of the Nehemiah Studio, that has involved 3 church sites per studio. So we've just completed 12 church sites. We consider this the gateway for these churches to enter into development. These churches who are property rich but cash poor do not have the funds to invest in this riskier part of the development process, the pre-development process, the assessment and the financial analysis of their properties. We were able to get that done through these graduate students at the University of Washington to give the churches a sense of what it meant, a sense of what the capacity of their site was, and what the actual financial analysis says about development of their property. This has given these churches enough faith in this to move forward to the professional analysis of their property in the pre-development phase. And this is something else the Nehemiah Initiative does, is we raise funds for those churches that we considered pre-prepared, that have gone through the Nehemiah Studio or something like the Nehemiah Studio that has given them the preliminary assessment of their property. We raise funds for the professional pre-development services.
That's phenomenal. And it's really important that we set these foundations to ensure that we are successful. So in talking with both of you, Darryl and Donald, we've talked about the programs and some of the things that your organizations are doing with BHI, because, you know, BHI is not a thing. We are BHI, and we all are making this work happen. We're talking about policy today. So share with me the policies that may have the success that we're looking for in the efforts that you're sharing. And, you know, Darryl, I'll go with you, and then Donald, you can answer that question after Darryl.
Yeah, you know, the policy piece is incredibly important because it has a direct effect on everything we're trying to do in terms of. So Patience talked very eloquently, as she always does, about our collective efforts at getting the CHA passed this year. And it's very true. Folks want to know nationally what's going on up here in the rainy corner. What are y'all doing up there? Because you're certainly making some noise, and we want to emulate that. Send us the playbook. I get that a lot through NeighborWorks, a national organization of other community development corporations and CDFIs like HomeSite. I'm going to speak in February to NeighborWorks National Training Institute. I've invited patients to join me to talk about CHA because I continue to get questions about it, and they're very interested in looking at promising practices. And I talk a lot about our work at BHI. And so, you know, BHI comes with me because we are BHI. And so when I present there, I'm talking about the things that we're working on, all of these small, what feels like occasionally small inch moving efforts, but they have gigantic ripple effects. And so, you know, as we find success grows, there are folks watching us nationally. And so that policy work, that advocacy work that we're all a part of here, things may start to happen in other parts of the country because of what we're doing here through BHI. So I would say that, you know, every effort matters. You know, leaning a little bit here and maybe the air moves 2 inches, that air moves someplace else as well because of that effort, and people are watching and really paying attention. So it's a long answer, but I just want to, you know, commemorate for a second, all of us, just to think about what we've been doing in these couple of years under the auspices of BHI. We are literally changing the ground under our feet, and people are taking notice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Darryl. Donald?
Well, you know, I'd like to say too, as Darryl has said, you know, we're getting national attention, and with one of our founders and our spiritual leader, Bishop Gary Tyson, has made connections nationally in his role with other Black churches throughout the country, who have been very interested in knowing what we've done and how we've done it. And we're now looking at a formal packaging of what we do, so we can take that out on the road and we can help other churches, not only in other communities in our region, but nationally as well, that are asking for some assistance in them being able to do the kinds of things that we're doing here. So particularly with policies and legislation like what we call the ROOP, the Religious Organization Owned Property Ordinance, that we were able to pass here in Seattle to provide additional density bonuses and height bonuses to affordable homes projects on religious organization owned property. That has been phenomenal. That with the CHA and special credit programs and down payment assistance and closing cost assistance and some of the debt remediation that we've had all developed collectively, are policies that provide these churches, as I said, that are property rich and cash poor, with more hope, with more benefits, with more advantages over private developers. And this will hopefully slow or prevent them from selling their property to private developers, because private developers then can't develop as much of the property in the ways that we would like to see it developed for affordable home ownership. So they would develop the property in less units, less density provided on these church properties, because we've taken that away from them. We've taken advantages away from them and we've given it to the developers of affordable homes, including our church partners. So if we continue to do that, we will provide advantages in the hands of those people that are developing for Black home ownership, advantages above and beyond the private market. And that is one result of the policies and the legislation we've been able to put forward.
Yeah, these are, some incredible things that we've seen in the policy space. And this conversation really talks to the ecosystem of the work we're doing. That Homesite and Nehemiah Initiative are doing things that are very different, but also very similar to support our shared priority, our North Star, as my core team member Gregory Davis says, is that 1,500 new Black homeowners in the LMI community in 5 years. And so this is the way that we're doing this through this ecosystem. So I'm really excited about that. And so, last question for you, Donald, as we talk about this work that we're doing, this ecosystem, there's a groundwork that's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't just be pontificating and ideating on these things. We have to actually get down on the ground and do the work. I understand there'll be a Black Clergy Summit happening on MLK Day. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure, it's something we've been working on for some time now. And again, with all the things that we need to get to, it's something that we are finally being able to realize, and that is a gathering, a major outreach to Black clergy. And Black clergy, both in Seattle and Tacoma, we are now planning for 2 summits, one in Tacoma on January 13th. Information on that is yet to come, and we will get that out to the BHI partners, where we will assemble the Tacoma Ministerial Alliance being involved in this, assemble Black clergy in what's called a land summit. And really having that frank discussion and that conversation, clergy to clergy, about development of church property for affordable home ownership. So this is something that we haven't done yet. I think this is something that's going to be very beneficial. It's something BHI needs, it's something the Nehemiah Initiative needs, and it's something our community needs, both Seattle and Tacoma. So in Seattle, on MLK Day, so this is MLK weekend, we're planning this as days of service, not just a day of service, but days of service, with the MLK prayer breakfast immediately following the MLK prayer breakfast on January 15th, 7 o'clock, Sheraton, Seattle Sheraton, 7 a.m. We will follow up at 9 a.m. with a Black Clergy Summit of Seattle and Seattle area Black clergy to do the same discussion. We'll have a panel of Nehemiah Initiative folks, Nehemiah Initiative pastors that are engaged in development now, and some folks from BHI as well that have been invited to have a panel. We'll do about an hour of conversation, of information given out to those pastors that may not know what we're doing, that may want to do this themselves. We realized by word of mouth, Nehemiah has grown its faith partners, but it's only done it on a limited basis. So we would like to do that on a larger basis, grow the organization, grow the effort, grow the opportunities that there will be for land availability for the development and production of affordable homes.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Donald, and thank you, gentlemen, for this rich conversation. It is, really imperative that we share this information and that we get our BHI partners connected in the part of this work. I pray that folks that are out there, that you are looking for those dates and you come and support those prayer breakfasts and the summit, because this is how we get this done in community and in network. So thank you, gentlemen, again, and Bambi, I'll pass it off to you.
And thank you all so much. Nicole is getting the gold star for moderation, finishing exactly at 10:40. So super excited. Well, we heard a little bit about the Covenant Homeownership Act and that enthusiasm from our previous guests. And now we're going to have the pleasure of a conversation with the primary sponsor, the co-sponsor and #1 champion. So this section will be the Covenant Homeownership Act, lessons learned and next steps. We'll be hearing from Representative Frank Chop of the 43rd Legislative District, Representative Jamila Taylor of the 30th Legislative District, and we will have as our moderator Michael Brown of Civic Commons. Representative Chop was elected to the House of Representatives in 1994 and was Speaker of the House for over 20 years. His career started as a community organizer. He commits himself to policies that reflect his community organizer values: affordable housing, economic and social justice, and health care for all. He was the co-sponsor and #1 champion of the CHA. Representative Jamila Taylor is a public interest attorney, youth advocate, and small business owner with a passion for community service and a commitment to serving the public good. She was elected to the legislature in 2020 and is the primary sponsor of the Covenant Homeownership Act. She is a member of the Members of Color Caucus, serves on several legislative committees, and has pretty much been tearing it up with just 3 years under her belt in the House there. And then we have Michael Brown, who is our moderator today. He is the chief architect of Civic Commons, an initiative of Seattle Foundation. Civic Commons is the Black Home Initiative convener and serves the region by providing the tools to lead the development and practice of civic engagement, shared responsibility, and aligned efforts capable of making that change and driving improved outcomes. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Michael.
Thanks, Bambi, and thanks for the challenge of honoring the time commitment. So we will end at 11:15. Hey, everyone, and very appreciative of all of you, and very appreciative of Representative Taylor, Representative Chop, former Speaker Chop, in terms of their leadership with something that I think we would all acknowledge is one of the most significant moments in this state's history. We've last legislative session, House Bill 1474 was passed, the Covenant Home Ownership account, and this work is meant to address the history of housing discrimination due to racially restrictive covenants in Washington state. And the program will provide down payment assistance, closing cost assistance to groups of people identified in the Covenant Homeownership Study. And this can help thousands of people in the state achieve home ownership. So this is going back to the previous session, something a number of states, a number of stakeholders outside of Washington state are very interested in learning more about, but here we are today to learn about and hear from Speaker or Representative Chop and Representative Taylor about lessons learned, and next steps associated with this. So let's start off. Representative Taylor, you were the primary sponsor of the Covenant Homeownership Bill. Before we dive into your reflections about the process, can you give us a brief description of the law and what type of change it represents?
Yes, the bill, now an act, is a method of providing down payment assistance to a particular community. Folks who have been impacted by racially restrictive covenants, which became unenforceable in 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. But we all know that the restrictive policies do have an intergenerational impact. And so what we're trying to do, what we are doing with this act, is going headlong into those racially restrictive covenants and how they impacted whole parts of our communities. And so with this bill, folks who would have been impacted by those racially restrictive covenants would be eligible for down payment assistance if they meet certain criteria, certain AMI, and other factors that may go into account. But it's not just those who would have been impacted by the bill directly itself. Those are our elders, and some of them have been able to purchase homes, but we also know that their descendants were impacted by the limitations that their elders, our elders, experienced. So this is what's unique about the bill in terms of looking at the intergenerational impacts, and it's we're tying it specifically to the doc recording fee, where we increased it by $100 to have a substantial fund so that we can really do justice in our community, economic justice, sustainable justice. And a lot of folks are concerned, well, Washington never had slavery. Well, racially restrictive covenants and other intentional policies have the same impact, if not more insidious, because some of them are still implemented in ways that we are still recognizing to this day. And so this is an important first step on expanding Black home ownership, retaining Black home ownership, and bringing a true inclusive economic future. And so this could not have been done without allyship and folks who are co-conspirators. And so Frank Chop, is the #1 champion for this effort, was amazing in the process, not only of getting started with it long before I was introduced to this effort. Like, the Black Home Initiative is probably unique in many, many respects across the nation, because the nonpartisan work, the research, the findings of more than 40,000 racially restrictive covenants in our state, just from the 4 most populous counties. Okay, let's think about that. We have 39 counties. Okay, so think about how expansive this insidious racially restrictive policy has been implemented in Washington State. You think about how it works with local planning commissions and zoning and permits, the fact that we had actual sundown towns. A lot of folks just don't understand our collective American history and Washington's participation and contribution to that. It's not all positive, but it's not all negative. We've also had a representative from the African diaspora in the state legislature since 1889. And right now we have 11 Black legislators. And so, working in concert with our allies, our co-conspirators, the other members of color, we're bringing a different voice. It's not a monolith. Not this group. Black Homeownership Initiative is not a monolith. We're all bringing different perspectives, and multi-partisan perspectives, which makes this even more important in terms of policy making to impact other states and nationwide leading efforts.
Thank you so much, Representative Taylor. Well, it's then a great transition to you, Representative Chop. You're the second sponsor of this bill. Can you tell us a little about how other legislators responded to the initial idea when it was just forming, before the stakeholder work and the actual bill language was written?
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I consider it a great honor to be invited to be part of this group, so thank you very much for that. I also appreciate being called a co-conspirator by Jamila. That's I wonder if I can get a pin to put it on my lapel here. Basically, Jamila and I had a lot of fun doing this. It was a great partnership, and we knew there was energy behind this idea because people had talked about dealing with the whole issue of Black homeownership for a long time. And we saw an opportunity to go forward and actually get something done. Besides, who's going to say no to Jamila and me? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, we always approached it with a sense of positive energy, and it paid off. The original idea, actually, for the covenant homeownership thing with the document recording fee and all that, came at a lunch that David Hackney asked me and Strom Peterson, who's the Housing Committee Chair of the House Democrats. He asked us to, basically, what can we do about Black homeownership? And I said, all right, how about this idea? And I don't know how it came out of my brain, but it sort of did. Basically, the basic outline of it. And the neat thing about it is that after a few months, we said, well, we need a real prime sponsor who's going to be passionate and very knowledgeable. And that's where everybody advised, oh, let's get Jamila involved. And so I said, oh, great, because it also helps that she's an attorney. I'm not, thank God. And she knew a lot of the legal aspects that are extremely important in doing this work, because it's not just something for Washington State. Obviously, people around the country are paying attention, evidently. And we just need to be sure that we can not only get the votes for the policy, but then also have a legal strategy to defend it. And we explained it by saying, look, it's more of a tort claim. The state of Washington harmed people. The documents, the state of Washington recorded those documents, and it's clear and it's in writing, and it's right there. And we were very fortunate to have University of Washington and others to help document the documents. And the other thing is the state of Washington defended these racist practices back in the 60s. I mean, it's just like, what? So we had a real strong basis just on a legal approach that really made sense to people. So, and I do want to point out that part of this whole effort was getting partners who can actually pull out the troops. That's when we met with Patience and Bambi. Again, who's going to say no to Bambi, basically? We originally said, well, let's try to get a couple hundred people to show up at the hearing. And it kept going up and up and up. I said, oh, keep going, keep going, keep going. So it ended up over 800 people signed in for a testimony. And Strom Peterson dedicated 2 hours to a committee meeting, which is unheard of. 2 hours just on one bill. That sent a very strong message. And in fact, Strom then later in the year actually said this is the most important bill that we passed in the legislative session this last year. So we're very pleased with that, but it took a lot of grassroots organizing by Bambi and Patience and others, and most of the people on this call, basically. We're also blessed with quite a number of organizations that stepped forward quickly to endorse the thing. I mean, we had a long, long list. It got so long that I asked Jamila to actually redo the paper that was listing all of these, because there were so many, and it was all part of the thing of putting forward of saying that this is the right thing to do. So I think it passed. I don't know about Jamila or the rest of you, I never doubted it would pass. That this is a great idea, now we have to implement it. And we had this real dynamic going that it's hard to say no to such a great step forward to address the legacy in this state that needed to be addressed. So people got it, they got the moment of history, and they said, yeah, let's do it. So here we are.
Thank you. Back to you, Representative Taylor. Can you tell us how the stakeholder engagement process helped to ensure that this bill not only made it through the legislature, but and this is remarkable, but did so in the same year that it was introduced.
Well, I mean, the same year it was introduced, but it was a multi-year effort that had a lot of credibility behind it. You had the 7-point plan from BHI that had an incredible amount of research behind it. You had the actual accounting of the racially restrictive covenants done by the University of Washington, and the 700 plus volunteers who are engaged in that process alone. The fact that I would hear from Republicans behind the scenes who said they support this effort, but can't support the bill because of the document reporting fee and in principles they don't support, generally speaking, any new fees or taxes or what have you. But we did get one Republican to vote for this bill, so this technically a bipartisan bill. But at the end of the day, implementation is where we really need to spend most of our energy, ensuring that we're getting the people who are most impacted by this. And what we found and what we know about the racially restrictive covenants, all of them restricted Black people. Some of them restricted Jewish people. Some of them restricted Native Americans and other groups, Asians and other folks of color, Latino, et cetera, et cetera. But that common thread among all of them were Black folks. And the other part of it is that it has brought us into conversations that mischaracterize what we're doing. We are trying to create structure for economic inclusion of and economic thriving of communities that where our advocacy helps many folks, but then we're left out of the policies that we help design. And so this is where the BHI Institute, I'm calling it an institute because you all will be training other states how to do this, okay? Let me just change the name of your network. But BHI Institute has been instrumental in bringing voices to the table that we would not have been able to reach in any regular fashion as legislators. We are talking folks from the mortgage industry, realtors. You talk about folks who are building community land trusts. So it's not a singular viewpoint of how this policy is drawn. Like we're bringing in folks who have built affordable housing, folks who are bringing up ideas around what is first generation opportunities versus first time home buying. These are things that as a legislator, I did not know that there was a difference. And I'm learning as we go along. Like this is a plane truly being built as it's flying. And we know that folks will have criticisms and concerns, but we also know we can make pivots. And we also know that we have communities who are absolutely committed to the ultimate goals and will remain steadfast in support of moving us towards that common goal. There will be folks who have complete doubts. We're standing on the shoulders of our elders and folks who have been in the movement. So where Representative Chops was very assured that this was going to come through and be passed, I am a child of a historian, literally. And I have seen where Democrats in particular have not been able to come through on policies that we should pass. Let me repeat that. There have been times where Democrats in a Democrat-led legislature have not been able to come through on things that they should have done. But we are in a different day and age where new voices and the constant push of community-driven policies. And this is the perfect example of that. It sets our accountability up to another level. And I know that we work together in concert, in conspiracy, in collaboration to get things done.
Well, Representative Taylor, you're absolutely correct. Nothing is ever as simple as you want it to be. There are always challenges. So, Representative Chop, I'm going to bounce this back over to you. Can you share with us some of the challenges that you faced in this effort?
Well, to build on what Jamila mentioned, is that for me, it was a big learning experience. There's a lot of work that was being done for many, many years that I was relatively unaware of. And so part of it was meeting a lot of folks and learning from them in terms of the various aspects of it. At the same time, Jamila and I really wanted to stay focused on both the strategy to produce more homes for Black home ownership, but also, be aware of the legal challenges that might come later, so that we sort of threaded a needle to make sure that we move forward together. So the big thing was to stay focused, but frankly, it was easier than I thought it would be, actually. So when you say about challenges about going forward, the fact that we'd have regular stakeholder meetings with I can't remember the number, maybe Bambi could remember, but there were a lot of people in the room, and people were very supportive of going forward. And I thought there might be some resistance or hair splitting about some of the ideas, but part of it was just to make sure that we focus in on the legal notion that this was making up for past wrongs. And therefore they said, oh yeah, okay. At the same time, we need to think broader than this into the future, because there's a lot of people who need to own homes, not just folks who were harmed in the past. And part of this is I think one of the other thing about it is that a number of legislators were used to hearing the talk about the generational wealth gap and things like that, and this and that kind of problem, and they got sort of stuck in their thinking that, well, yeah, we agree there needs to be somebody done, and we just said, look, this is what we can do to do something. So getting over that thought of, well, yeah, it's a major problem, we should do something, but we actually said this is what we should do, and they went along with it. So imploring people to take the sense of urgency and taking the action, seize the moment, as people would say, it finally won over the day. But in the next question, I could tell you some more about the challenges going forward, because frankly, the challenges going forward in terms of this legislation is more compelling and challenging than getting the bill passed.
Well, let's kind of pivot, because we want to come back to that. Representative Taylor, can you update us a bit about where the law is in the implementation process?
So right now we are recruiting for our Covenant Homeownership Act Oversight Committee. We have a few spots left for community. And we're also working on a study led by the National Fair Housing Alliance. And we need community input like nobody's business. Like if we can get the Nehemiah Initiative and the Black churches to help our elders and our members or residents to participate in the online study or in questionnaire, I think that will help inform how we determine the true eligibility criteria and how we distribute the resources. Like one unintended consequence of giving a grant is that there could be tax implications. So this particular act is a down payment assistance loan that can be forgiven. So we really wanted to make sure that we wouldn't want to put somebody in a tax situation that ultimately erased the benefit of what we're doing. Again, these are conversations that we're having in terms of building out a sustainable program that folks will actually want to take a part of. And then the next phase after we get the study is to then recruit folks to participate in the program itself, and we'll be able to distribute the money beginning in July. So the doc recording fee, I believe, started to be collected, will be collected in January of 24. And so we'll have our first phase of money, and then we'll go from there. We're blessed with a robust economy in Washington State. While real estate transactions are down, it's still pretty solid in comparison to some other states.
Thank you. And so, Representative Chop, you made note of there are definitely some challenges, coming down the road. So if you can weave that into kind of then this broader question of you mentioned that there are some challenges in terms of you faced in terms of narrowing down what this bill would ask for from the range of solutions provided by the work group. So what's next in this effort, and are some of those ideas coming back for 2024?
Yes, thanks, Michael. There's a real challenge here, but I believe we're up to it, in large part because of what Donald King and Darryl Smith talked about at the first. They are actually identifying actual sites, whether they be churches or otherwise, for home ownership opportunities. This is critical. We have to up the production. There's been a lot of effort for home ownership. Like with HomeSafe, they have 20, 30 years experience at that. Then you got Habitat as well, and also the Homestead Community Land Trust, along with Donald King's effort. So we know we can do it, but we have to up the production level. There are a lot of people harmed. Let's get on with it. And part of that is to identify specific sites, and that should also include not only the churches, which I'm so happy to hear what Donald King has been working with the Nehemiah Initiative. That's critical. And really appreciate his efforts there. But we also had to look at specific publicly owned sites that be converted into land for home ownership. Because guess what? The local governments participated in the racist practices of the past. I mean, that's an understatement. And so therefore they have a responsibility to own up to their share of history. So there are public sites that are available that can be dedicated for this purpose. And so I've started a list. I imagine Donald and others probably have their ideas, but we have to collate those ideas. The other thing is we need to have starter homes for first-time home buyers that are actually affordable. I mean, if you go on the market now, I mean, what is it, 900,000, 800,000 in Seattle? That's a problem even with significant down payment assistance. So we need to look at ways to produce housing, starter homes, not big mansions, but starter homes that are there for first-time home buyers. And we've identified a couple that can produce starter homes at a much less price, that also look good and would fit into a neighborhood, particularly around modular housing. And we did some preliminary work building these cottage villages for the homeless. Well, there's no reason why we can't up that effort and make them available for folks who are buying their first home. And of course, I don't want to get into naming specific companies, but there are some out there, not that many. So we need to mobilize the effort to produce more starter homes that people can actually afford. Last thing is that it wasn't just the government that had a problem here in the history. There were private banks, etc., other private for-profit institutions that participated actively and benefited and profited off all of this stuff in the past. Therefore, there needs to be a coordinated effort to reach out to those banks, others, not just banks, but others as well, to say, okay, hey, we got a good start here, and we are contributing the dock and courting fee, which is logical because of the nature of the source. But what are you going to do to help us? Okay. And one of the biggest problems right now is the interest rates for home loans is ridiculous. So I'm not a financial expert, but we got to have their help on recognizing their role and also how they can be positive to help contribute to the solution. So I look forward to a coordinated effort there with a lot of you involved in reaching out to the private institutions to say, hey, come on, partner with us. Let's get on with it. Thank you.
Representative Taylor, Representative Chop, we have a few minutes remaining. It's more of a kind of an open question. Any final comments and thoughts that you want to share?
I think what I would want to share is that our guiding post on making progress is to review what we're accomplishing from the 7-point plan. I've seen many work groups come together and they create a plan and then they put it in a drawer. This is an effort that I see where you're implementing the plan, you're constantly looking at what aspects of the legislative process, the community development process, other processes to help us achieve the goals of the 7-point plan. It's really critical that we measure our progress and celebrate those wins and find ways to bring others to the table as we accomplish more things on that plan. But also recognize that there are everyday people who could benefit from all of those opportunities who just aren't connected to this network, and we can do more outreach. And it's not an offense to anyone here who has been doing an incredible amount of outreach. There's just millions of people out there, and there's only 50, 60, 100, 200 of us. So, that constant outreach is going to be important and should be part of our core values as people are like, I didn't know about this. Thank you for sharing that. Also thinking about other legislative efforts that, overlap and can complement our work. So thinking about the community reinvestment program, that's $200 million a year, that is focusing on reentry, economic development, business startups. There are folks who could also benefit from the programs there from the buy and for communities. They have an interest in down payment assistance. So you might not qualify for the down payment assistance program here from the Covenant Act, but you might qualify for it in other spaces, and collaborating and understanding other instances of opportunity is going to enhance the work that we're doing. Again, the way that we solidify and sustain our efforts and see it successful in the community is outreach, and ensuring that those who could stand to benefit from these policies and our allied policies are able to actually take advantage of them.
Can I add something to that, Michael? Is that okay?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, building what Jamila just said is that we are going to be sponsoring a budget proviso in the operating budget for some additional state general fund money to help get this thing launched appropriately. And so we drafted up a budget proviso, and luckily a woman named Alma Weber, who's on our House Democratic Caucus staff, is editing it with your input. We got input from actually a number of people who are on the call today. But basically, we want to provide funding to help on the outreach efforts to identify people who would be potentially eligible for this program. Secondly, it's important to have housing counseling services available, because if you're starting out and most people don't know all the ins and outs of getting a mortgage and all that, plus things to watch for over time. So housing counseling is important. Another one is to help provide some additional money for organizational capacity, which was mentioned also previously by Donald and Darryl, because we're being asked to carry out a enormous step forward. That means we need to have capacity to do that. And also, if it would be helpful, having some additional money for design efforts to propose specific architectural models, not just single family, obviously, but duplexes, fourplexes, etc. And that's why, again, I point out Donald King here, him working with the University of Washington could be part of that solution there, because we need to have some creative juices going in terms of how to actually make this work. We passed at the state level an effort which could be helpful, which is House Bill 1110, which increased the density required across the state in residential neighborhoods. So therefore, let's see that as a potential opportunity to free up land and to put multi-units on a particular site, because we have to look at it from all angles. I mean, I live in a house in Wallingford, and it was a split lot decision. So that we built 2 tiny homes there. Not me, some developer brought it. My wife and I bought one of the, skinny houses, and there was opposition back then to skinny houses. So I said, well, all right, we'll form a coalition to oppose fat houses. Now, that's a joke, by the way. I'm just trying to keep people interested in listening to what we have to say. At any rate, the point is that we have to look creatively, whether it's splitting lots or increased density, or some other architectural approach to get this job done. And that's extremely important to make sure these starter homes, are actually affordable to people who want to own their own future. Thank you.
And friends, this is what leadership looks like. So much appreciation to Representative Taylor, Representative Chop, your work shepherding this piece of legislation is to be applauded. So thank you. And Bambi, I'll kick it back to you.
All right, thank you so much. Always wonderful when we get these two people together and have them chat. Never know what's going to happen, and it's always educational and incredibly heartwarming. So thank you for being here. So we're going to continue to keep our amazing time schedule at this point. I think that we had Michael there trying to get 2 gold stars on top of Nicole, finished 1 minute early, but just wanting to make sure that we are making the most of your time. We know that many of you may not be able to be here for the full 2 hours. We will again record this and you will be receiving that, but I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. So our next conversation is called Centering Community Voices in our comp plans. And we have 4 guests today. We have Anna Boone of Zillow, Gregory Davis of Rainier Beach Action Coalition, Inye Wakoma of One ORE, and we have Sean Scott of Statewide Poverty Action Center. Anna is going to be moderating a conversation. She leads the government relations and public affairs for Zillow across the Western U.S. She works with policymakers, associations, and community partners to advance Zillow's mission of helping people get home. And Anna is a team member of the BHI core team. Gregory is the founding member of Rainier Beach Action Coalition and has worked for 20 years to build community and give all Rainier Beach residents a pathway to contributing to their neighborhood in a meaningful way. Gregory is also a member of the BHI core team. Inye Wakoma, Inye's family has lived in the Central District here in Seattle since the 1940s. He is the co-founder and the land steward of One ORE. As a journalist, filmmaker, and visual artist, he explores themes of identity, community, history, land, politics, and power through the lens of personal and visual narratives. And then finally, we have Sean, who is a Seattle-based historian, writer, book author, and organizer, who is the policy and field campaign manager for Statewide Poverty Action Center. He works to build power and community for policies that alleviate the root causes of economic disenfranchisement. And today we will hear an amazing conversation between these 4 around centering community voices in comprehensive plans. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand that over to Anna.
Thank you, Bambi. And no pressure, I guess, for me and my fellow panelists on our timeline here. But thank you so much to Inye, Gregory, and Sean for joining me for this closing conversation. I'm really excited to continue learning from all of you, as well as have our audience learn from you. So as Bambi said, we are going to dig into how to center community voices in the comprehensive plan process. It is very easy to feel quickly out of one's depth when considering the complexity of comp plan updates, which oftentimes holds people back from engaging. So we're not here to get into the weeds on comp plans, but rather to challenge that hesitancy and highlight the importance of including community voices as we're looking forward to this 20-year vision for our region. So I'm going to start with a question for Sean. As Bambi mentioned, Sean is a historian. So Sean, I'm hoping you can help ground us in this conversation. You understand very deeply that if we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. As we think about comp plans and future development here in our region, how can we avoid some of the pitfalls of the past within our vision for the future?
Absolutely. And it's such an important question, and great to be here in community and in solidarity with everybody around this issue, which is, I think, an issue that touches so many other things that we care about. Housing is at the center of so much. So cracking this code historically, I think, is a very, very meaningful and important effort. About a month or 2 ago, I had the opportunity to write an essay for the strangers, sort of going over some of the contentious nature around housing development in the city of Seattle, in specific around the 1994 comprehensive plan. And I think one of the main lessons that kind of comes from that is that generations or social movements that tend to not achieve or accomplish as much as they can when the opportunity is presented tend to regret it. Mayor Rice was the mayor at the time of the debate around the 1994 sort of plan about where we would put housing, how we would build it in the city of Seattle. And many years later, he was interviewed by KUOW and said that he felt as if the way that those debates had gone down was a bit of a missed opportunity, in the sense that Seattle did not do everything that it could to have put housing in places that maybe weren't used to seeing a lot of it, or weren't used to seeing a lot of density, weren't used to seeing a lot of housing options, and the fact that maybe organizers at that time, folks who were around for that debate at that time, there was some room for improvement as far as the fact that they were sort of swimming against some contentious political winds, and pushing back, I think, against that by elevating the voices of people who stood the most to gain from a very, very robust strategy for building more housing, is a thing that also stands out quite a bit as well. So as far as avoiding the pitfalls of the past, I would say familiarizing ourselves with that history, and then making sure that we're elevating the voices of people who have the most to gain, so that people who are more used to taking part in the political process, folks who might tend to have a bit more power in the political process, we're hearing from a panoply of voices, and not just from those who are folks who we're used to hearing from in our local politics in particular.
Thank you for that, Sean. And that leads nicely into the next question, which is for Inye. You've been doing so much work to make sure that community voices are centered in planning here in Seattle. Can you tell us a bit about Case 21 and walk us through how you developed the Seattle is Not Affordable report, which is a great example of community-based policy development and advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very grateful to be here to share our work as Wanawari in Case 21. And it's been really great hearing all the connections from the other working groups, which really, I think, will probably add some depth and context to the importance of the work that we're doing here on the community level. So I think to talk about the report, I think it's important to give a little bit of background about what Wanawari in Case 21 is. So basically, Wanawari is a center for Black art, community stories, and organizing here in the Central District. As an organization, we took a Black-owned home that was in danger of being sold, and we rented it from the family and converted it into an art and community center, and then built a platform to do a number of different things out of that, both cultural and related to housing policy and Black homeownership retention. And so that's where Case 21 comes into play, right? As a community organization, as a community center, we began to work actively with Black homeowners to think about how the work that we were doing at Wanawari in this single instance could be replicated or modified by other Black homeowners to help them solve the challenges that their families are facing. And so Case 21 really is a way of regalvanizing a dispersed Black community by identifying Black homeowners that are still in the Central District in South Seattle, building intentional community amongst those homeowners to support each other, and then engage folks in that network who want to opt into getting more involved in direct policy work, right? So that's learning about land use policy, learning about development policy, learning about housing policy, and then figuring out how they want to engage that directly to make the kinds of changes that will make the kinds of solutions that they want to enact more accessible. So I would say that's a nutshell around the work that we're doing. Because we've been building this project from the ground up since 2019, we've been actively doing the engagement work on the community level, bringing together Black homeowners. And so last year, or the year before last, actually, we were approached by the Office of Planning and Community Development as they were beginning to prepare to have their contribution to the comprehensive plan. And they wanted, you know, some more critical input from the community level, right? Just understanding that the solutions that had been advanced around the issues of housing density and development, a lot of times they didn't take into account the realities on the ground for individual homeowners, and particularly Black homeowners and folks from marginalized communities. And so they wanted us to, you know, really figure out how to work with them to think about the questions that they had, you know, on the city level, and figure out how those questions translated to a community, and then take those a modified set of questions, and then engage the community in getting feedback around a set of critical issues. And so then what we did is we developed a series of focus groups, and we identified folks in our network who wanted to opt into that process and engage, you know, them in the series of focus groups around these issues. And out of that came the Seattle is Not Affordable plan. So the work is both a combination of our partnership with OPCD, but also it's a continuation of the work that we had been doing up until that time. And one of the things that we started with Case 21 was a community participatory research project that was designed to actually identify, you know, the key challenges, issues, and hopes and visions of Black homeowners, right? So that it would help define what our future policy work would be through Case 21. So it was really, I felt like a beautiful continuation of the work. It was definitely the direction that we wanted to go in engaging folks in working directly with policymakers. So so I think that's that helps to sort of frame out exactly what it is that, you know, that I would be talking about. The report, you know, we issued a summary report to OPCD that they then took and began to process and include several key elements in the comp plan. But the report still stands, you know, on its own, right? There's the summary report, and there's a much longer, fleshed out version of that document. And the document, you know, touches on several key points, and a lot of them, you know, really, you know, do hit on the things that we've heard so far today. You know, one of the key issues, I'll highlight two key issues. One of them is having a more equitable way for communities to engage in the democratic process, and that obviously is not just voting, but as it is engaging government on all levels and making sure that there are ways that community has measurable results, right? That folks are just not going to hearings and raising their voice, and then they see no outcome, you know, from those efforts, right? But transforming those relationships so that there's a true partnership. And then the other part is sharing the load, making sure that, you know, as we think about how we address development, and particularly at this moment, our housing crisis, that there's a more equitable distribution of the load across the city, right? That development is not, you know, focused just in certain areas where historically, you know, a lot of the sort of back end sort of functions of city have been placed, whether you're talking about industry or, you know, or social and public services, or other types of sort of public benefit infrastructure. Those are the places where also, you know, the poorest people in our society also, you know, have to find housing. Right. And then so those are the places that then, when there's need for more housing and there's need for more density and more development, those are the places that get targeted, and which obviously, you know, drives up the cost of housing and drives people out of the city entirely. Right. And so, you know, those are some of the things that you know were highlighted, two of the things out of many things that were really highlighted in the findings from the report, that I think, you know, resonate with, you know, what we've been discussing here today.
Can I ask, Inye, was there anything in the report and that you learned through those conversations that surprised you? That was unexpected.
I would say, me personally, no, no, and I'm just being candid that, you know, I've been involved in not necessarily housing issues per se, from a policy standpoint, but I've been involved in community organizing and community action work, literally my entire life. My parents introduced me into this work. And what I'll say is that a lot of the things that were brought up in the report were issues that were a part of common conversations in our community as we talked about sort of our collective and individual fortune and sort of life prospects, right? And sometimes it had something to do directly with, housing issues. Sometimes it just had to do with, how public institutions were or were not investing in our communities, right? How public officials were or were not responding to our needs and concerns as a community, right? These were just common conversations, right? And then there were some certain things that were very specific, right? Although it was not raised specifically in this report. Well, it was raised on a couple of points, but if I were to say as a matter of public policy, if we looked at something like weed and seed, that goes back to the 80s and 90s, that was a strategy that actually was a tool that actually displaced homeowners if someone in their family had some suspected or verified drug activity, on the premises, even though the homeowner was not directly engaged in that. That was a policy that people talked about a lot. That was a tool of dispossessing people and entire families, from their homes. Right. And so as you sort of unwind some of the threads that people talk about as in relationship to their firsthand lived experience, you begin to understand how, these singular policies are connected to networks of policies that all kind of work together. Right. And so when these issues come up in this report, it's easy for me to start to connect the dots and say, oh, these are themes and things that I've heard my entire life. Right. So I think what's different is that when we packaged it and put it in a report and then presented it back to the city, what was surprising for me is that this was a revelation for a lot of folks, in government, that these are issues and connections that they had not considered, that were not on their radar, right? So, I would say that, the meat of the report, there weren't surprises. I think in looking at how the report has been received and how it's proliferating through various city departments, that there are things that I was not expecting.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm going to shift over to Gregory. Gregory is the managing strategist of the Rainier Beach Action Coalition. You have been at the forefront of community development. Can you please share with us what you've learned from your work within the Rainier Beach Neighborhood Plan and also with the Seattle Equitable Development Initiative and Zoning Pilot?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for the invitation. Definitely have some esteemed people who are part of us today that's going to be part of making this successful. One of the things that I'll say is that change can happen. Change can happen. We've activated folks in our neighborhoods and in our communities that have brought about change that has such a far-reaching effect that it needs to be noted. And so I think this is the other part of what I've learned, is that it's really critical to have kind of what I'm referring to as a durability of story. The idea that we need to build on like this thread of community remembrance. And Inye just made reference to the importance of it in terms of that Case 21 report, how what was in there was a revelation to a lot of people. And what he's doing is holding story. They've not heard it. And imagine the impact of them having been able to hear it. We would have been able to move, work faster, change faster. So this idea of, the community institutional knowledge, creating a durable thread of remembrance and holding it is really one of the things that we've learned. And, we can say, what does that look like? Well, I happen to be on the Priority Hire Advisory Committee, which is a group in City of Seattle that has underinvested neighborhoods now being prioritized to get into the construction trade. We had to do this because when there was a rebuild of the Rainier Beach Community Center, there were no local contractors on that development. And so we started organizing. And one of the things that we recently have been able to do was to add to every priority hire advisory committee meeting, not only a land acknowledgement, but a legacy acknowledgement, recognizing that legacy that created this very initiative. And so that's what I mean by holding story and having a durable story to tell. I'm hearing things on this call. Nicole doesn't use her words loosely. So when she talks about this being a game changer, like, who's going to remember that reference 10 years from now? We got to hold the durability of that story. When we hear, and I know Mike Brown doesn't use glowing terms, easily. He used the term remarkable. Who's going to hold the story that this is a remarkable movement in the history of our region? So that's really one of the things that we've learned, and that there are so many things that's tied to that. The Representative Taylor mentioned this term uniqueness, this idea of having revealed the thousands and thousands of racial restrictive covenants in this state. We need to remember that story, and that there were people here who helped uncover that and helped sway the change in our communities for the people who are really most vulnerable.
Thank you, Gregory. And that kind of leads me back to Sean, who again is a historian. Sean, do you have some examples that you can point us to when we think about kind of the durability of story, the lineage of community action in our community? Are there things that you would raise up as examples, perhaps, that you've written on?
Yeah, absolutely. Once upon a time, I was a student of Representative Taylor's father, Quintard Taylor, at the University of Washington. And as an undergrad working with the Seattle Civil Rights and Labor History Project, certainly the work of uncovering, at that point in time, Seattle's specific history with racial segregation was really our mission. Just as this is first of its kind legislation in the country, that was a first of its kind research project that I think has done a lot to further what Gregory was referring to as sort of that lineage of story. And I think about the fact that housing and movements around housing, both for and against, have really been some of the most vital and progressive, but in other hands, in some ways, some of the most regressive movements that we've seen as well. I mean, we have seen in the city of Seattle historical movements around housing initiatives, around the Fourth Responding Initiative for transit, also included in that initiative, which ended up failing in two separate elections in 1968 and 1970, were a movement for a statewide land bank or a countywide land bank. On the other side of it, we've had housing movements that have really, I think, tried to make cities more inclusive. The fact that in the middle 1990s, a lot of the conversation around the eventual establishment of sound transit included knowing that there would be the opportunity for transit-oriented development. And activists at that time had learned from really a century-long history of housing and transit electoral failure in the city of Seattle, going all the way back to the Vogue Plan in 1912, when you had neighborhood cranks, teaming with very, very defensive business interests in the city to say, we don't think that there should be 90 miles of public transit put in the ground in the city of Seattle in 1912. At the same time that was a failure, at the same time that was a shortcoming, if you don't have that disappointment or that setback, you don't have the eventual triumph of the establishment of the growing light rail system that we all have come to know and love, and hopefully the eventual establishment of a lot of housing around those light rail stations and beyond as well. So I think that, and the work that it was able to do with the Civil Rights and Labor History Project as a historian, and knowing that is, once that history is sort of out of the bottle and has been written, it cannot be erased, and that memory cannot be deleted. So it's just been really inspiring to see in the course of this legislative action, that conversation come out of the ivory tower and go into our actual communities and actually be impactful in a way that should serve as a model for other localities, other states, other parts of the country as well.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I want to go back to something that you shared with me when we did a prep call before this panel. We're talking about creating access points for the community as even the community engages in policy work, but also the need to, I think you framed it as know what to translate and how to translate it. And this goes back to just the complexity of something like the comp plan. So I'm hoping you can speak to a bit kind of how you take that and make it actionable for the community and make sure you're getting those key pieces of feedback.
Right. That's so one, I want to say, I'm here speaking today, but I'm speaking on behalf of the entire Case 21 team, right? And I say that because, just in all candor, I did not work on that focus group project, nor did I write that plan, right? And I want to acknowledge, I really want to acknowledge everyone, on the team: Francesca, Kristen, Theron, Chris, Maria, all the folks that, that put that project together, right? From the time that Nicholas Welch, approached me, and then I said, hey, we have this opportunity, right? And so I think one, that's important, is a team effort. Two, to your question around, how we translated it, right? And so I guess I'm saying I'm sort of speaking second person, because a lot of that translation process was done by the working team, right? But, in my sort of, checking in and witnessing, what they were doing, a lot of it was taking, the issues and the questions that were framed by the folks at OPCD, comparing it to the conversations we were having in the community, then prioritizing, what are the things that the community has been saying, right? And then using that as the framework or the lens to filter the questions, right, that were coming from the city, right? So it wasn't, sort of taking the city's sort of square peg and putting, the community's, the city's square hole and putting the community's round peg in that hole. It was kind of the reverse process, right? And, so, there's a, for us there, there's an ethos around, community first, right? And understanding that while folks who engage in policy understand the mechanics of government, they understand the mechanics of industry, they understand the mechanics of all these large systems. The things that the community actually understands is how those systems actually operate on the end user side of things, right? Which is ultimately the most important part of the system, is what is the end result, right? And so I think a lot of times in policy circles, people talk about the inner workings of systems, right? They talk about how can we do things based on how they understand how the system works in relationship to other systems. And, the way that we start is we look at the end result, and we reverse engineer from that standpoint and say, okay, this is how we need to reframe the entire conversation, right? And so I would say that just as a matter of ethos and approach, that's always our starting point. That's where we started in thinking about how to even bring this work to the community, how to introduce it as something that would be valuable for folks in our community to be engaged in.
Thank you. Gregory, question for you. You have said that you see the Rainier Beach Action Coalition as stewards of the neighborhood plan. Can you tell me more about that and maybe tie in how you've leveraged the equitable development zoning pilot?
Yes. And Norm Rice was mentioned, and the neighborhood plan process, started during his administration. And it's interesting, in his memoirs, he's probably speaking more about the education levy as his legacy as opposed to neighborhood planning. But I have to speak to the other way, because it's what his work in his administration is what got me into understanding the neighborhood plan and doing urban planning and being able to start an organization like Rainier Beach Action Coalition. And so we've just determined that in order for the hopes and dreams of the residents way back in 1994, approved by the city council in 1996, and actually rolled out shortly after, that we have to steward that and remember that and bring that forward to this day, because we have young people that we want to pick this work up, who need to know those stories, who need to know those people to carry it forward. So we just found a need to steward it, because ultimately the government and corporate resource holders, they come and go, and the community is the staying source there. And so the stewardship is something that we needed to hold in face of that challenge, because that, that creates a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of esteem challenges for community when people come and go and forget the effort that they put in. So the stewardship is really there. Now, an interesting parallel with the equitable zoning pilot, has to do with Wanawari, and the fact that the policies that existed prevented community centers like Wanawari from getting their permitting improved, because they weren't in the quote unquote proper zones for that work to happen. But places like Wanawari are the places that hold our story, that will create and support the durability of that story. So this idea of being part of the neighborhood plan kind of supports us in being able to be at those tables that residents otherwise wouldn't be able to attend, to be able to make these changes and to hold the dreams and hopes of folks in this body, in these particular spaces.
Yeah. Thank you. Just quick note on timing. I'm being told that we actually get extra gold stars if we go slightly past 11:50. So we're okay on timing. Thank you, Bambi. But Inye, can you speak a little bit to your experience? And apologies if you hear a sick 3-year-old in the background. Mommy's being loud. Can you share your experience as a recipient of the Equitable Development Initiative grants, and also with the zoning piece there?
Yeah. So, I want to say that, wow, that's kind of a big question. And I want to give just a little bit of background. So we opened Wanawari in 2019. No policy thinking about what we were doing, just trying to rent the house and keep the home off the market. Of course, we didn't know the thing that we were doing was illegal, right? Operating a community center in a residential home. So we did get on the radar SDCI and had to go through change of master use permit, which is a long and lengthy process, led to a bunch of stuff, including case 21, right? But it also initiated our relationship with OPCD, right? And then, we had folks at OPCD that were very proactive in letting us know about the Equitable Development Initiative. And so then we applied, for that grant program. And that has been instrumental in helping us work with architects and other folks to think, about the possibilities of our space, right? And what we could actually do with it, now that we had this, we've gotten our administrative conditional use permit. That also led to OPCD inviting Wanawari, along with a number of other folks, many of whom are on this call, to be a part of their co-design for the equitable development zoning work that they were doing. And so we're involved in two sides of that sort of that issue, which is we're on the user end of getting funds from the city, to develop this property, for greater community use, and then running into a lot of restrictions around zoning, building codes and zoning, and so on and so forth. Because even though we had gotten the change of use, all of the zoning restrictions, still apply to, just to the neighborhood in general. EDZ lifted that, right? It lifted that and has opened up the range of possibilities about how we can think about what we want to do moving into the future, right, with the space physically. And so, I think I always say, our relationship with OPCD, has been one of the most important relationships that we've had, around, this set of issues at Wanawari. One, because it's helped us think about the possibilities of this space just in terms of its community presence. And it's also allowed us to have the kind of relationship where we can bring people into the back end of how these things actually function, to think about, how can we participate in shaping the systems that will impact what happens on the other side of the equation, right? And so I feel like we've been in a very advantageous position, as a result of that. We're very excited, about moving into 2024 and 2025, bringing more Black homeowners who have been coming, to our gatherings and doing some of the frontline organizing, bring them into some of those conversations, having them think about what the possibilities are. Some of those Black homeowners, we've been having side conversations about how they want to develop their individual properties. And for example, one of our Black homeowners wants to, has a very large backyard, wants to build something that will better accommodate their extended family. We have another Black homeowner that approached us and said that, they're very, very interested in figuring out how to leave one of their homes to the community as a cultural space at some point in the future, kind of as a end of life, trust type of situation. So there are a lot of really interesting conversations that ultimately do come down to, resolving a lot of these zoning, land use, and development issues on the policy side. And we want those people to be a part of actually developing the systems that will make those things possible for them.
Love that. Thank you. As we close it out, I'm going to ask the same question to each of you, which is bringing us back to our shared priority of increasing Black homeownership here in the region. But what is one thing that you see that needs to be included in the Seattle comp plans, or that should be top of mind for this group as we go into this planning process, that would increase Black homeownership? So we will start with Sean.
Absolutely. I think that it has to work on a number of fronts. Number one, what good is this momentous legislative effort that so many of us have been a part of in getting HB 1474 passed if people who would stand the most to benefit from it, and prospective Black homeowners in particular, don't know about it? There could be a lot of different government services, and so many examples that we've had of government services programs that have been available that don't hit home. And in this case, that is a literal turn of phrase. Like, you actually need to have prospective Black homeowners know about it, hear about it from their legislators, hear about it from all of us in our communities. Making sure it's visible as an option is the first thing. Number two, you want to have it implemented and designed in such a way so that Black homeowners, frankly, are the ones who benefit from it. Those of us who have that historical memory and that institutional knowledge that both Inye and Gregory have spoken to so eloquently, we're aware of a number of different government programs that were intended as a form of redressing a particular historical harm, maybe had a bit of targeted universalism as kind of the motivating, the animating force behind it, but lots of other folks benefited from it. And except for folks of color and Black folks in particular, I think about the fact that affirmative action, for example, you're much more likely to be a beneficiary of that if you are a white woman, say, than you would be if you were a Black person. And so that's an issue. We want to make sure that that's not replicated in the implementation of 1474, so that the legislative win and what this represents is not whittled down. And then number three, we want to keep the conversation going with our lawmakers as well. There could be subsequent legislative fixes that are needed, tweaks here and there to strengthen the law and to make sure that it's keeping pace with rising costs of living, the economic realities that are going to change in the coming years. So that maybe, for example, an increase to the fee and at a certain point in time as home values continue to escalate, using that as just one perspective example of many, of making sure that we don't, sort of celebrate too much at the finish line here of this legislative effort and getting it passed, which was certainly substantial, but making sure that we can kind of continue to move the ball forward with it. So those are the three things that I think about, and really look forward to hearing Gregory and Inye's thoughts on this as well.
Thank you. Gregory, same question.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that I would say is let's like recast how human development is referenced in the comprehensive plan. It is referred to in there as community well-being. But one of the things that when we generally hear about the comprehensive plan, and you mentioned this in terms of like the complexity of it and it kind of being rooted in physical features and in public safety, is we have to recast our comprehensive plan to be really centered in human development, community well-being. We looked at that plan, you know, each of the jurisdictions and neighborhoods in the city dealing with it in a mixed way. Inye mentioned something that is critical to this point, and is the human development or community well-being element that's in the neighborhood plan seen through the eyes of like the end results. All of these plans, how are they affecting the well-being of the citizens? We've got to do that analysis as opposed to just imagining that the way it's written now, that's going to impact the well-being of folks. As Inye said, we got to flip that. We got to have the well-being of folks craft those elements more so that the end result is to our benefit and not the other way around, imagining those elements are going to benefit us without, you know, our voice in it. So really casting that. You know, the other that I would say is just write in home ownership. There's a narrative in the comp plan that really focuses more on rentals. And we have to lift up home ownership in that document much more. So let's do that analysis and see how much that balance is, and let's rebalance that so that home ownership gets as much of a impact and reference as the rental space.
Thank you. And Inye, in our last couple of minutes here, we'll give you the final word.
Yeah, you know, those are, you know, the points made by Sean and Gregory are so important, you know, so which kind of took both my ideas, but but it's fine. No, because I had a third one. I had a backup. So, you know, I think just on a more nuts and bolts, I want to go just sort of rewind to, you know, the point that was made earlier that, you know, both I made and Sean made. But Sean talked about Norton Rice reflecting on a missed opportunity to have more dispersed development across the board, right? And I would say that, you know, that's still such an important priority, and particularly for the folks that we work with, because, you know, just the existing framework of how development is done is just, it's designed to put, you know, just unnecessary pressure on our homeowners, right? And it's the kind of thing, it's the first domino in a long line of things that begin to happen, right? When, you know, once your property, you know, has been targeted as, you know, the place where development can happen, right? Everything else is designed to push you off of that land, right? Out of your home, right? And so just shifting, you know, and saying, hey, listen, you know, if we don't do anything else, you know, let's ease the pressure on these people, right? And, you know, if we take it all the way back upstream, it means some of this work around development and density is going to have to take place, you know, in other neighborhoods, right? And of course, that's a huge political issue in Seattle, as it pertains to, you know, wealth distribution, who has access to, you know, the halls of power, and how things, you know, get leveraged in city, county, and state government. And so there's an element of that, you know, is not so much rested in how we think about the specifics of policy and development in the comp plan. Some of that has to do with how do we actually look at how our democratic process is constructed, right? How do we really look at how people have access to actually engaging in, you know, in our public institutions, you know, on a level playing field, right? And we know, whether we always want to admit it at all, the playing field just is not level when it comes to, you know, to the access and the ability to, you know, to leverage power, right? And so, you know, and we talk about, you know, power, you know, in community organizing as one of the foundational tenets of understanding how we can do things, right? And so I think, you know, we have to begin to think about, you know, some other aspects of our public institutions, when we think about something very specific like the comp plan.
Thank you for that, Inye, and thank you again, Gregory, Sean, and Inye for participating in this. I think that all the folks in our Zoom room would agree this was a really valuable use of time. So thank you again. I saw some great resources dropped in the chat too, so folks can make sure to check that out. And Bambi, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It has been a lovely couple of hours, and I am so glad that we have been here together to witness all of these conversations. And now we are ready. We are grounded in our why in many different ways. There are many others that we have not had the time to speak of, but they will be there. We will make sure that those stories are coming forward. Thank you so much to all of the participants today, all of the work they did to prepare. And you couldn't get a better group of humans together who were actually going to make something happen in a particular period of time. And I'm so grateful to everyone and to all of you for listening. If you were here today presently and you had to head out and then come back, we've had a really full room. We're so appreciative of your time today. We'll also make sure to record this. It will come out to you so that you can watch it. You can do some rewinding on some of those comments because you're like, wait a minute, that was really packed. Let me take a minute and put that back in and digest it. It will be there for you. We will be creating this living memory. Thank you all so much for being a part of this network. Again, it is a network. There is no one in charge. You are in charge. You are the one you have been waiting for. You are the person who can do the things that will be asked. I will do my best to translate those into actions, bring them to you as I can through the digest. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I hope you all have a wonderful winter holiday, and I'm just super excited. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.